Welcome, everybody, to the Inner Carnivore Podcast, Season 2, Episode 3. I have a wonderful guest for you guys today, especially applicable to those with children. She has a master's degree in nutrition science. She's a registered dietitian, places an emphasis on working with children and those with autism spectrum disorder. She brings a wealth of knowledge and a very unique approach that a lot of us don't see with registered dietitians. As always, I hope you guys had a very Merry Christmas. And if you guys are interested in supporting the show, it is absolutely free. All you need to do is like the show, leave a review, rate it on your favorite platform, subscribe to the channel. It takes a few seconds and it helps immensely. Without further ado, my guest today, registered dietitian Greer McGuinness. I hope you guys enjoy the show. Welcome, everybody, to the show with my guest today, Greer McGuinness. How are you doing today, Greer?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I really appreciate you coming on. So I have to tell the story of our first interaction.
Sure.
I posted a reel about RDs, and I feel bad because I know a few RDs, right? Like I
Yeah.
talk consistently with a few RDs that are awesome, right? But it's really, really, really easy for me to pick on RDs. Like, I swear I have to stop myself because I could do almost every video on an RD. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just got to stop. And you messaged me, you're like, I promise we're not all this bad. So I partly apologize, but I'm also glad to bring attention to another RD that is not so far lost in the wheel of nutrition.
Yeah, no, it was, and I see this quite often. It's and it's actually something that's publicized in our private Facebook group that's for dietitians. Like, there's a huge split of us. There's some on the right, some on the left, and they're always fighting in the Facebook groups too. So no, it was funny because I had started a carnivore journey for myself. So that's why I was following you originally. And then I saw you were posting RDs. I was like, oh no, I just wanted to make sure you knew that we're not all on the same track.
I have to defend sometimes in my comments. They'll be like, oh my gosh, another RD. I'm like, well, there are, like, I do know a few. Like, I have talked to a couple that are really good. But it's always interesting to me because in the United States especially, like, RD is often considered the, I don't want to say authority, but the upper echelon of education and expertise on nutrition, right? Like, MDs don't get hardly any nutrition education. You have PhDs, but RDs are you have to go through all of your education, you have to go through all of your trainings, your internships, and then you have to be accredited and, I'm assuming, keep up continuing education. How is there such a divisive split? Because I can honestly find, and this is why I end up with a lot of videos on RDs, I can find RDs that tell you absolutely have to have sugar. Sugar is the most vital nutrient on the face of the earth. And then I can find you an RD that says, yeah, you don't ever have to eat sugar, ever.
I know.
Like, how do we end up with such polar opposites on, like, I thought science was fairly cut and dry.
No, and to be completely honest and fair, at one time I did not think this way. Okay, so, and this is going back nearly 20 years. I've been a dietitian now. And when I first started, my undergraduate degree and going through school, I actually was going to be a social studies teacher. So it was a very, veer right, decision making for me. And, in undergrad, we learn, most of our classes are science based. We could basically have a minor in science. And it was a lot of fun. We really did think we were learning the correct way. We really thought we understood the biochemistry and the biomakeup of a human being and what foods and how they work in the human body. And that was all great. After I graduated, I went into my internships. We have to do a year of internship for free, typically. Now, I think some are paid now. And then we have to sit for our boards exam. Now, back 20 years ago, we actually didn't need to have our master's. So that is actually a new concept that they just passed, that now in order to sit for your RD's license, you have to have a master's degree. We didn't need our master's. So when a lot of us went into practice, none of us went into private practice. Private practice wasn't a thing back then. Only a select few dietitians did private practice because it was hard. There was no internet. We couldn't advertise. So a lot of us went to work in hospitals, nursing homes, and things like that. About 10 years in, I realized that I really wanted to go back and get my master's because they were continuously upping credentials of what you needed in, working in nursing homes. And I was a chief clinical dietitian. I was running one of the largest nursing homes in my area with over 600 people. And I was looking for other jobs, but you needed a master's. Even though I had the experience, they still wanted that master's. So when I went back for my master's, it was so interesting because everything I learned in my undergraduate was thrown out the window. And most of the graduate teachers that I had, even one worked as a supplement ingredient support system for a major herbal company. So it was basically everything I had learned in undergrad, the food guide, the food guide pyramid, eggs cause cholesterol, like all this stuff we were starting to realize didn't mean anything. And that was kind of like a wake up call for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm very confused of how we went from this is what this means. And now forget everything you learned. And now this is the other way, the other side of science. So for me, that was like really eye opening. And I was like, okay, maybe I was like, did I not pay attention? Like, I thought I was a pretty good student. And did I not pay attention enough? Did I not, read the books enough? And it was really interesting learning the other side of science. And that was, I think, a really big key piece is understanding that there were two sides to science, and what I learned in undergrad versus what I learned in my graduate programs were very different. And for new dietitians, I think, I'm hoping that they'll get to that point, but there is a lot of indoctrination with our education. And a lot of that comes from the food companies. And that is what kind of fuels our textbooks and our education and how they give us that education background. So for me, I think that was, going back for my master's actually pushed me into the other direction versus others who are still kind of maybe old school in that direction too.
Yeah. That was, so I have my bachelor's in sports medicine. And so I took nutrition classes, I took, biology classes, A&P, kinesiology. I took microbiology as an elective because I thought I wanted to do a PT program. And like, I remember coming out of school, not really that I knew everything, but like what I learned was what it was, right? Like no different than, the 5 or 6 physics classes I took in college, right? Gravity is XYZ, and you have all of these natural laws, and that's just the way it works. And then, it took me a really long time. And honestly, the first step for me looking into there maybe being two sides was this concept that, big food, and I hate these terms, big food and big pharma,
I
but like
know.
that's literally what it is, right? Like these
Well, only like
giant,
8 major companies own like everything. So it's like, it's not as independent as we hope it is. That's a
yeah.
problem.
And I first actually realized that that wasn't really a conspiracy theory term when they used that term big sugar back in, the 60s and they referred to them as sugar. It was like the Sugar Association paid off Harvard scientists to shift the blame to saturated fat. That's another story. But I really realized like how much money went into this. And so then like I started thinking, I'm like, okay, and from your perspective, somebody who's done all of the trainings, you've sat for your boards, you've done your continuing education, is it a push to keep people teaching the same thing so we can keep the cogs of the big wheel going? Or is it, hey, like there's a lot of nuance to science, let's just streamline it, keep it simple, we'll all teach the exact same thing, and if everybody teaches the exact same thing, then we know what everybody's doing and we can adjust accordingly. Like does that make sense what my question is?
Yeah. And I definitely think it's the second thing. I definitely think it's more of just teach everybody the same thing. Or, this is what I try to explain to everybody too with science. So I have published 2 papers. One is a peer review that I did during my master's. You have to either do a thesis or you publish a research paper, and I published a research paper. That was my first real understanding of how corrupt the science world actually is, where, our teacher explains to us like how to find an accredited and a higher level of publishing journal, to find whatever, to publish. But then I didn't realize that you could also then figure out ways to pay those particular journals to publish your publications. That's a problem, because I could just pay a journal article and then eventually it's going to work its way into PubMed. That's a problem. So I think to keep it consistent, they teach everyone the same, but it's practicing medicine. Everything is forever changing. I mean, and look at Zantac. We at one time we said, yeah, if you have acid reflux, here's this PPI, take PPI, Zantac, and it'll be fine. 10 years later, it's like, whoops, we just realized that it causes cancer if you've been taking it for so long. We didn't know that because we didn't have those longitudinal studies to show that could do that. And that's just science in general. If we only have research for a certain amount of time, 5 decades, 10 decades, and then all of a sudden new things come out and we go, whoopsies, we didn't take into account long term what this could happen with environmental factors and everything else. So I think to keep it consistent and to keep a narrative, I'm pretty big on that, using that specific word of narrative, because if we don't use the same narrative, that's why there's so much mass confusion. And you and I talked about this quote unquote misinformation of so many different things, is that's what they're trying to kind of crack down on. But we're looked at as these educational people that also have been providing misinformation for a very long period of time too.
Yeah, I think that really hits it on the head, because, if you have too much nuance, then you have everybody like doing their own thing, and now you have all these issues. And then you come back to the money, and I was preparing for a podcast and I was looking up some stats, and so I'm going to throw a couple numbers out there. The pharmaceutical industry is expected to hit a $1 trillion market cap just in the United States by 2030. And you go, okay, like $1 trillion, like that's a lot. The food and beverage industry is already $1 trillion and expected to hit 1.5 by 2030. And like those numbers are so big that you can't even, like, you're like, okay, what does that
You can't even understand what that number means in stacks of actual
So if you add those together and then you put those into GDP for countries, that would be a top 10 GDP in the world. Just those two industries. And then you're like, wait a minute. I'm like, yeah, that means those two industries generate more money than 200, whatever many countries there are, 220 different countries in the world. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And then, as you said, the process of getting stuff published, there was also reports that industry-funded research was 4 to 8 times more likely to be in favor of who was funding the research.
I think it was like 1.3 million or something was given towards paying people to approve research studies.
Yeah.
And for like 2 years, something like that, where, I get, what people don't really understand is there are some sites that when you do publish research papers, you get into this site and every once in a while, it's like a database. So if another research article is trying to be published on autism, because that's my specialty area, or anything that has to do with autism, whoever is trying to look for a peer review. So remember, everything's double peer reviewed a lot of the times in research papers, but it depends on, again, if you're paying somebody, if you're paying them to do the research. But for us, there's like a database where someone can go in, put in autism, and my name will pop up in that. They'll send me a direct email and say, hey, we have a study we would love for you to peer review. So a lot of the times it's just people like whoever is like in this industry or in this particular area peer reviewing somebody else's work, which is great because I'm not getting paid and it's literally just my time on my own. And I find it fun. So I find, being a peer reviewer person to, which is really great. But the other side of science is we know now that, and I know now that people are actually being paid. It was crazy when I saw that number. It was like 1.3 million to pay out people to review research in favor of whatever company is trying to get their research paper published. Not only that, but there were over like 10,000 retracted research studies in like a 2-year period. So it's like, when people say science is settled and the science is conclusive on that, and I just want to go, are we sure? Because have we looked at every possible angle on this? Because practicing medicine and evolution of humans, like how we are today in 2024 is vastly different from that research paper that was done in 1980, when there were not as much toxins, things like that. We lived a different life, less processed foods and stuff. So we're comparing apples and oranges to this evolution of life. So for me, it's one of those things that we need to kind of take a step back and realize that misinformation, I always say it's the other side of science. And that's what I always try to explain with RDs too, is like, there is a whole other side of science. Look at carnivore. I mean, we were always taught I swear, you could not survive on protein alone and fat alone. You needed carbohydrates, you needed sugar. This is what we were told. And then people like you come out and go, guess what? I just blew that out of the water. And I'm in a bunch of Facebook groups too, because like I said, I started my journey too. And I couldn't believe the amount of people improving their health and everything by being on Carnivore. Because again, it literally squashed everything that we were taught that couldn't happen. So I thought that was so interesting to me, that I think this is something that we just need to continuously evolve and monitor.
Yeah, I clearly, and I know the paper you're talking about. It's billion.
Was
It was
it
like
billion?
$1.20 billion
Yeah, billion.
that the pharmaceutical industry was paying peer reviewers. And the reason that is an issue is because most of the time, peer reviewers, those conflicts of interest don't show up in a paper, right?
Right.
Like if they're paying, there was also one that came out. Coca-Cola spent over $100 million on research, which like you get, but they were also like paying people to do their research. Those conflicts of interest have to show up, right? Like you go down to the bottom and you're like, oh, Coca-Cola paid this person to do the study. But if Pfizer pays somebody to peer review it, that doesn't necessarily have to show up into a paper. And so you're like, you read a paper and you're like, okay, how do I know?
Yeah.
Like there's so much. And then you bring up the retractions. Yeah, tens of thousands. And those were, I forget the actual term, but it's farms where they basically attach people's name. People pay, they get their name attached to research papers, they run it through a peer-reviewed process, it gets published, and now that person is like, hey, look, I'm published. And then they're like, wait a minute, we have tens of thousands of these that are all being retracted from Wiley, right? Like this is not like some random website that posts. Like this is what is supposed to be a top notch. And it just brings so many questions into it. And then, like you said, I was told the same thing, right? You have to have carbs, right? Carbs are your preferred energy source. You have to have this. Your brain runs off carbs, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not anti-carb per se, right? I don't think that we were ever meant to have this many carbs. I don't think we're supposed to be able to have access to all of these carbs.
Well, look at the food guide pyramid. Remember, 6 to 11 servings of carbohydrates a day was like a recipe for disaster. And now, and now we go, oh wait, well we're not supposed to have that many. You should only have like 2 to 3 a day because we overconsumed. So again, it's like that evolution of research and science too.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, so a lot of my videos, I'll do I'll do like the dueling comments, right? Like you have to have carbs. It's like, okay, what happens if you don't eat them? And people are like, you have to. I'm like, well, but what if you don't? And they're like, you eat carbs. I'm like, I really don't. Like sometimes I do, but I can go, months without it. I know people that have gone years without it. So if we have to, why aren't people dying from this? And then, it just, you see people like brains just explode from it.
But it makes sense because here's the thing. When you become reliant on something, you feel that that's like important or you need it. So I'll be honest, like my first 2-3 days on the carnivore diet, full carnivore, it was tough. I had like headaches. I didn't really feel great. but I'm like, I know this is my body kind of detoxing a little bit from all of that sugar and carbs. And I knew that I wanted to do carnivore for a while because I wanted to try it. B, I had some health concerns and issues that I wanted to see if it would clear up and fix. And I was just kind of curious as a dietitian too. I was, just curiosity. After like by the third day, I was good. Like I actually was like, I stopped craving all that sugar. I stopped by the third day, like I was like, oh my God, I didn't really crave like a piece of chocolate. I did make whipped cream for like a dessert, and that was amazing. But it was just really interesting how my body really shifted pretty quickly and was like, I felt better. I had more energy. Like I used to think like, oh, I have to have carbohydrates or something in the morning or else I'm going to throw up or I just don't feel good. Now I have some over easy eggs with some sausage, some bacon, and I'm like good to go. Like I feel so much more energized and better. I did great at the gym the other day. Like it was so interesting for me to kind of understand that everything that I had learned once before just really didn't matter.
Yeah, and that was a huge thing for me too, because I played baseball in college. So I was a college athlete, and then I got, I coached collegiately, got into strength and conditioning, did personal training, did bodybuilding, like all of the things athletic, right? And I was the person who had to eat every couple of hours. I ate like I would be the guy that was eating as I walked out onto the workout floor, right? Eating during games, eating in the middle of double headers, like always eating, because I would hit these points where I'd be like, the low blood sugar feeling, the losing energy, like I'm in for a bad time, right? Like I have to be conscious of this. And now I'm the guy that like I prefer to work out fasted. I might not eat until 11 or 12 or 1 or 2 or like whenever it fits my schedule. I might go. I drove up to Vegas to do a podcast, which is about a 5-hour drive. And I ate eggs and cheese before I left. I had like 6 eggs. And then I didn't eat for almost 12 hours. And I was
Yeah.
fine. I was like, man, I like feel totally fine. I was like, this is weird. Like, but
Yeah.
that's the best part for me. And that proves your point that like we have this ability to adapt, and it's your body changing. It's the people, if they want to argue optimal, right? If you want to argue optimal carbs versus no carbs, cool. We can have that conversation.
Yeah.
But it's the people that are like, there's no nuance. You have to. And I'm like, yeah, well, you kind of don't.
Well, it's funny that you say that because it was only like 2-3 days ago, someone had posted in one of the RD groups, like, does anyone have like some honest information about carnivore, like research and stuff? And there isn't still a lot out there, but, and it was very interesting to see everyone was actually being pretty respectful, except for a couple comments or whatever, but it was actually pretty respectful. But the majority of men were commenting on it being a good, the RD men were commenting on it and things like that. And so it's like, we just don't know. We still, it's like kind of like a new concept. It's like kind of going back to early on where we don't have that information. But it was very interesting how the dynamic is where RDs, like some of them were like, this is horrible for your health. This is so bad. It's like, and then some people were like, but it's really not. If you monitor your patient and you're looking at them, they're doing great. So what you think would be bad doesn't necessarily mean that what is true, which I thought was really interesting. So I'm hoping that more information comes out on this and data and things that I've learned. Remember red wine used to be really great for people, and then it was like, well, it was really more the fact that they were in affluent upper rich people that were drinking red wine that had better cardiovascular things. So it's like, it's things like that I find funny, where it's like all these things that we were taught was just like so out the window and just not even a glimmer of anything anymore. So I'm hoping more data will come out on carnivore too, because I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. And I think once you start looking into it, and I'm glad you brought up the affluent part, because when you start looking at research on really anything, so like I was going into this meta-analysis on fiber, and there's a lot of research that says, the more fiber that you consume, the less, issues you're going to have: diabetes, heart disease, all-cause mortalities, all of that. But then you start looking in and you start looking at some of the individual studies and go, okay, well, the people that eat the most fiber are the ones that smoke the least, they exercise the most, if they're eating fiber, they probably care about their diet more so, right? And then, so then I'm like, well, how much of it is fiber and how much of it is the fact that you ate more fiber you also do all of these other things, right? Your fiber pushed down our throats, which means you're probably a little more health conscious, which means you probably do a little more in the way of exercise and taking care of yourself and not doing alcohol and not like all of these things. And so then I started looking at the same thing for red meat. I'm like, okay, all of these studies that show increases in red meat, well, eating the red meat, if you take a look at the FFQs, I hate FFQs more than anything in the world, right? Like when I first looked at an FFQ, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Well, guess what? If I eat at McDonald's and that classifies as red meat, if I do that a bunch of times, I probably don't care as much about my health. So is it any wonder that there's now these correlations between my red meat consumption and these negative health outcomes?
Yeah. So working in pediatrics specifically is a tough situation because, would it be better that more kids eat protein? Most of our kiddos actually do eat a pretty decent amount of protein. What kids lack of, with development and growth is actually fruits and vegetables. So, and we know that for an adult microbiome and an adult human body is very different than a pediatric system. So they do need a lot more extra fruits, vegetables, fibers and stuff. And I use a lot of fiber, believe it or not, in binding toxins. So if I have somebody who has a ton of mold, a ton of heavy metals, most of our kiddos are not even pooping every day, which is like, it's just a trickle down effect of diet because just ultra processed food is number one. So sometimes I will increase some of their fibers just to help get them pooping more and also helping to bind a lot of those toxins while we're detoxing them. The ultimate goal for me with a lot of my patients is getting them a little bit more of the better proteins too, because again, chicken nuggets and stuff like that, like it's so difficult because it's such in your face, McDonald's, Wendy's, like I went on a school trip with my son's fourth grade class last year. We went to the beach. We went like on this hike and they all had to bring their lunches. Now my son is gluten free because he's going to develop celiac disease. So, I make his lunch and stuff like that. So I'm watching all these kids unbox their lunches and take out stuff. And I could not believe what parents had sent with their kids. One kid had, I think it was just a Lunchable and a bag of Skittles. One kid had this, it was like from Five and Below. It's like this whole entire gummy thing. It's like gummy hamburgers, hot dogs. It was just like all sugar. And then she had like a bowl of watermelon and a block of cheese. And I'm going, my gosh, like, what is going on here? And I was talking to the teacher. I was like, is this like a normal, like, I've never really seen other kids' lunches, and I was like, is this normal? Like, is this what these kids are? She's like, Greer, it's bad. Like, it's just, she's like, by the end of the day, 2:00, when we're still trying to do stuff, she's like, these kids are all like falling asleep because they're on carbohydrate, sugar overload and things like that. Like, so it's really hard. And I can tell a kid who's a carb junkie from their microbiome. When I look at their stool tests, I could tell which kid has had too much carbohydrates in their diet, not enough like fibers or meats and stuff like that. It's actually really easy to tell. So working with families and just trying to get them on better healthy eating habits, that's like always, we just don't know how to eat anymore. You would think that like by now we would have a better understanding and parents would have better education, but they just don't. And it's so sad. And it's like one of those things that maybe Carnivore could take off with pediatrics and stuff, because I think it would be super helpful for them too, or just, a balance at least, with less processed food and more whole foods. That's always our goal, right?
Yeah, it's really tough. So my son was born early. He was 4 pounds, 10 ounces and like really small, right? Like I was, waking up every couple of hours and doing the finger in the mouth and doing, formula breast milk in a syringe to help him get his weight up. And early on, It was like just whatever he would eat, right? Like, I don't care, just eat whatever. And so now I'm like trying to get it out of the way. Like, because part of it is kids get super picky, right? They're like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm not going to eat that. And as a parent, you're like, well, he's got to eat something. Like, I would rather have him
Yeah.
eat something than nothing. And so, like, trying to make these changes, but it is really hard. They are just inundated with it everywhere. They go to school and they get, you know, less than stellar lunches, and then they're handed out food in class, and then they go to their friend's house, and then their friends bring snacks, and their friends share them snacks, and it's just it is overwhelming as a parent. Like, mine are 6 and 4, so like right in the middle of that,
Yeah, you're in the thick of it.
man. And so I'm like, and then you have one kid that'll eat steak, and then the other one's like, nah, I don't really like it. And then you have one kid that eats eggs, and the other one's like, nah, I don't really like it. And I'm like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh. And they're like opposite. How, like, because I really want to get into the kids thing, because I think
Yeah.
that's super important. How do parent, like, what are some things that parents can change? Because it's overwhelming if you were to, like, hey, change your kid completely. Like,
Yeah.
change everything that they've eaten for their entire life. What are just a few things that can help get out of the processed foods and into more of the whole foods?
So one of the main things is control. Okay, so when our kids are born and as they're aging and growing, what we're always trying to teach them is control. Learn how to brush your teeth on your own, get dressed on your own, get ready for bed, put your shoes on, get dressed, etc. So all of a sudden we started giving them more control, more autonomy over themselves and their body. And then all of a sudden they started understanding that they could also do this with food. And we're like, wait, that's not what we meant by take control. Like, you can have control over everything else. Like, can you not take control over your food? So a lot of it is choices. So one of the things that I started trying to really encourage my families with is, one, Rome was not built in a day. You are typically not going to change your child's whole entire repertoire and diet overnight. It's just not going to happen. What we need to do is learn how to communicate without a battle and fighting, because as well as I do, when you have littles, is like, it's exhausting, and you feel like you're arguing with like a little dictator to try to eat something. So try to start giving them options. So like, hey, do you want broccoli or do you want carrots tonight? Like, you pick, just giving them some of that control, but you're still controlling what you're offering. But just doing it that way, like, gives them some feeling of like, I get to pick. Okay, sure, I'll pick. Okay. So that's something that I usually tell my families to start. Usually I also say to start with snack foods. Don't start with meals sometimes, because that could be just too much for a child of change. And snack foods are super easy. So say, for instance, they eat goldfish and you're trying to get rid of the goldfish. You're trying to get them to eat something else. Don't just entirely take their goldfish away, because then they're going to be, a battle. But instead of giving them a bowl or the cup that you normally do, plate half of the goldfish that you normally would with some grapes or some fruit, and then give it to them, and just plate it and walk away. You don't have to have this conversation. You don't have to have this whole big elaborate discussion about how they should be eating well. They're not going to care. They're just going to say, I want my food. Give me what I asked for. And that's fine. So usually I say start with a snack and just start with trying to incorporate other things that you want them to have, like fruits or vegetables, because that's going to be just super important, of just showing them that we can pair these things with something you like for right now. And then eventually you can adjust and shift, and then, take it away, or just say, hey, well, you want a snack? And they say, oh, goldfish. You know what? I don't have goldfish, but I have grapes. Do you want grapes instead? And that's how we got rid of like half of the junk food in our house. Especially my son has ARFID, which is a severe feeding disorder. So for him, it is, those were like things that were his staples and his like safe foods. So like, in order to get rid of those safe foods, I had to find other safe foods that were better options. So it took a little time. When you get to the meal aspect, don't take something away, just start adding something. So say, for instance, they eat eggs every day, or they eat like a pancake or a waffle every single day. Say, oh, hey, do you want to try this instead? And have them make it with you. More kids are apt to, try something when they help make it. Like last night, my son actually helped me make marinara, like pasta sauce, and he ate it and he loved it. So sometimes just getting kids involved in the kitchen is like the easiest thing, even if it's something stupid like cookies, muffins, super easy, but the kids really like getting involved in doing that. So the more you can get them involved, the more they'll likely eat what you're actually making.
Yeah, and I can speak to that firsthand because my kids will help. And the snack thing has been the big one for us because the meals are pretty good. Like there's still some things that I'm trying to get rid of, like the chicken nuggets, right? But they like for the
But you
most
don't
part
have
they
to get
do.
rid of them. You could just make them with something else. So that's where, yeah. So it's, it's not about getting rid of something, but if you could add something. So if they like chicken nuggets, no problem. Try a different chicken nugget or make a different type of chicken nugget and add it with the ones that they already had and transition. So my son only used to eat 5 things. And one of those 5 things actually used to be Wendy's chicken nuggets in the red container. He actually would never eat them if they weren't in the red container. I would have to go to Wendy's, buy 20 chicken nuggets a week, freeze some of them and give them throughout the week because that was the only amount of meat that he would eat. I would literally just start making or buying like gluten-free ones and sticking them in with the red container and then plating it and walking away. I didn't have a conversation. I just played it and walk away. And for a while he left it until he started trying it and then I could transition out. So there are so many different ways of working with the child, but that's the biggest thing is I always say work with the child, not against the child, because as soon as you make confrontation or a battle, you are done. You will not win because they will just shut down and then you're going to get frustrated and eventually you're just going to give in and it's over.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, so the biggest one that we've had is the morning snacks. They aren't really big breakfast kids, so they will have snacks in the morning and then eat like a big lunch. But we've gotten to where now, especially my 4-year-old will be like, "Daddy, snack," and I'm like, "Okay, you can have an apple, banana, or cheese," and he'll be like, "Graham crackers," and I'm like, "Apple, banana, or cheese," and he'll be like, "Banana." Kid loves bananas, absolutely loves
Yeah.
bananas. I'm like, "Okay, like I'm fine with that." I'm very much am not. My kids are carnivore. Like I understand that my kids are not the same, and I'm totally fine with fruit. Like if they want to eat fruit till the crows come home, like that's fine. There are a lot worse things they could be eating. So yeah, I do think those are huge keys. So now transitioning with that. So I know this is a particular topic for you. What role is food playing? We'll start with kids in our kids' developments, like food and environmental toxins. Because I saw something, and I'll have to see if this is a correct statistic, that something like 1 in 2 kids will be diagnosed with autism by like 2040, right? Like an insane statistic like that. What's happening? Like, how are we in this position that we're in?
So roughly about 70% of children's diet is coming from ultra processed food. So we know 70% of what kids are eating is all just ultra processed from a package. And that's 70 something percent, which is crazy. 93% do not eat enough vegetables. Over 80 something percent don't eat enough fruit. We have major problems with this. And the downfall is we know the ultra processed food diet damages the microbiome. Okay. It does not produce favorable diversity. So a pediatric microbiome matures. So like, before the age of 2, a baby or a toddler's gut is going to look like a baby or toddler's gut. It's very different than an adult. But by the ages of 2 to 3, it should start looking like an adult microbiome. The downfall of all this ultra processed food and all this junk food, or the overuse of antibiotics in the United States, is that it starts shifting the microbiome into a negative. What it's doing is it's keeping kids' microbiomes more in an inflammatory state. And during that time, which is what we call this critical developmental time, the gut impacts the brain and vice versa. So this is where right now we have, I believe it's about over 40% of the American school-age children have at least one type of chronic health condition. That's nearly 50% of the American population of children have at least one chronic health condition: autism, ADHD, obesity, asthma, etc. It's insane. We should not be this sick. We really shouldn't be this sick. So with autism specifically, we know from more research that gut-brain connection, and I see this every day. I test kids, I test their microbiomes, I test their toxicity. ultra processed food also contains a ton of toxins. Ultra processed food sometimes contain a lot of heavy metals, even just from the manufacturing and the plants, and then also mold and things like that, environmental toxins like glyphosate. A lot of this is going into their system, and because their organs, their detoxification organs aren't fully developed, they're just storing toxins. And those toxins are then going and finding happy homes in our brain and our organs, and it just causing more and more damage and inflammation. So unfortunately for our kids, it's a snowball effect of decline of their systems and their bodies, and it's damaging their development and that neuronal development. So the neuronal development that is like going crazy from the age of 3 to 5, which is why a child's brain is about 90% developed by the time they're 5. All of that brain development, all of that stuff, they're nutrient deficient, which we need for the brain. Their guts are not working, which we need for the brain. Like all of these things are just working against them. Currently, the autism rate is about 1 in 32. Certain states is 1 in 18. So they keep projecting if we're going to be on this steady incline from 2020 to 2022, it was a 52% increase of autism from 2020 to 2022. So from 2022 to 2024, we should be getting some more statistics soon to see where the autism rate has gone. But, basically, if you have one classroom of children, at least one of them is going to have autism, if not more, depending on the state that you currently live in.
That's so wild to me. Honestly, that's part of the reason why I try to make content against the people who are promoting the moderation and this is okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of my frustration is diet sodas is a particular one that people love. Like I will fight diet soda to the day I die. I can't show you, right, like research as to you drinking a diet soda is going to kill you.
Yeah.
But I also I feel like we should have a general common sense that if I can dissolve, nails, or if I can use something as, cleaner for my battery, my car battery, I probably shouldn't be drinking it. Like just
your toilet. That's what I saw.
Right?
Soda cleaning your toilet.
So my thought is, and this is, I said we weren't going to get political, but it kind of goes into this whole push to get rid of all these artificial dyes. Do I think Red 40 on its own is the cause of all of our health problems? No. Do I think artificial sweeteners is the cause of all of our health problems? No. But I do think that if you're exposed to glyphosate, if you're exposed to Red 40, if you're exposed to all these additives, all of these preservatives, if you're exposed to toxins in your water, if you're exposed to toxins in the air, all of these things have to add up. All you have to do, and this is the really frustrating part for me, is and why I don't think anybody should promote any of these products. If you want to eat them, fine, that's you. But the problem is if you have accounts that are million follower accounts and they're like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with you eating this donut. Okay, cool. Well, a parent goes, it's not okay. It's fine for me, so it's fine for my kids, right? Like my kids can eat that; they'll be fine. But you take a look at statistics. You take a look at back in the 80s when tobacco companies started buying food companies. Red flag number one. And then you take a look at the rise of ultra-processed foods, the rise of added sugar, the rise of switching to seed oils, all of these things. And then you take a look at the rise of diabetes and the rise of obesity and the rise of metabolic disorders. And we can talk about death rate from heart disease, but heart disease is still going up, getting heart disease, all of these things. And I'm like, at some point we have to go, okay, we got to chill or we're just going to end up in this atrocious situation. Kids are not supposed to be sick. Your kids are not supposed to be sick.
The dose makes the poison, which is one of those phrases that want to make me go crazy. And I see, what's interesting is a lot of influencers who are actually, they have a degree in something, but they actually don't treat patients. And this is where I kind of have a problem. Is where unless you're actually treating what it says in a textbook, when you're just breaking it down individually, like glyphosate, if you were only exposed to just glyphosate, nothing else, it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. Your microorganisms, your lactobacillus, your bifidobacteriums are actually designed to deal with toxins. That they actually neutralize toxins, they neutralize heavy metals. So if we're breaking down individually toxic loads of individual toxins, glyphosate, heavy metals, if you were only exposed to one thing, probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. But the problem is I believe when we broke down how much food additives a child was exposed to during one meal, it could be up to like 30 to 40 different types of additives they are eating and consuming at just one meal out of a day. So it could be up to 100 or more food additives that they are consuming every single day. Food dyes, glyphosate, heavy metal. Like, I mean, it's just, a bombarded of toxins into the human body, and they are so imbalanced that they can't fully detox what they're supposed to be able to detox. Their bodies are deficient. So we're basically working against children. We have, I believe it's about 800,000 toxins we know about 800,000 toxins that we're exposed to every day. Only 12 of them have been studied far enough to know that they cause developmental delay or developmental damage in children. So every year, 2,000 new chemicals or toxins are created every single year, and a lot of them get grandfathered in. So we actually don't know what all these toxins can do to the human body, which is super scary. Out of 100,000 toxins, only 12 have actually been further studied on the brain development of children. So for me, it's kind of one of those things that it's like, when you say like the dose makes the poison, your liver and kidneys detox and do all the detox that you need. It's like, well, yeah, if you were a healthy individual and you had a great start and you didn't have all this exposure and you weren't eating junk food, yeah, no problem. But we are not living in that society where that narrative doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I think that is the huge key, because I try and tell people go, well, do you cheat on carnivore, or do you? I'm like, honestly, like I'm just gonna be straight up with you. I could eat a standard American diet, and as long as I knew when I hit that breaking point and I backed off and went back to carnivore, and then I went, like, I could do it every single day. And I did. I went 3 weeks of eating. I did an experiment where I did 4,000 calories of standard American diet, and like my glucose went from 79 to 81. Like my HbA1c went from 5 to 5.1. Like, and my insulin barely rose. Like, I was like, I can do that.
Yeah.
Now the only reason I can do that is because I have gotten myself to a point where I feel I am metabolically healthy enough that I can handle it. And I feel like a lot of these influencers do the same thing. They're like, well, I don't have a problem with it. Watch, I'm going to go eat McDonald's every single day and lose weight.
Oh my God. I think when you don't have health issues and you don't have a child that has health issues, it's so easy to keep your head in the sand and pretend like all this stuff isn't a big deal. It's when you have a child who's sick, when you yourself are dealing with chronic health issues, and that's where most of these health influencers come about, that RDs get so mad of, and other medical professionals get mad at it. Like, you have no education, you don't have a degree in anything. All the people with the degrees failed this person to help heal them. They learned how to heal themselves doing it a different way and understanding differently. So that's why we have lost trust in the American population, I believe, that where they don't trust most dietitians anymore, and they don't trust medical health professionals because we're broken records and we say things that a lot of the time aren't true. So I think that I wanted to make a post about this, because I was going to say, I really wish I could go back to being that ignorant. It would create less anxiety for me knowing what I know now, going, oh my God, like, because I live in, I've had to learn how to have a balance, a happy medium and a happy balance with toxic load, and knowing everything that I know today. I'm not 100% toxin free. I'm not, I'll admit it, because to live in that way, I have to live like in Denver, Colorado, in the Rockies, someplace like away from everything. But it would have been much easier to be that ignorant. But when you're that, when you understand it and you see how sick people are, and I have to deal with sick kids every single day, that's like gut wrenching. It really is.
Yeah. The people that we're influencing are the parents of these kids. And oftentimes most parents feed their kids the way either they eat or the way other parents feed their kids, right? Like, as a parent with young ones, like, I get that, right? I understand the social pressure of kids being like, can I have this? I had this at school and it was the best thing ever. And part of me wants to be like, and I'm stuck in this tough one because I grew up pretty, not sheltered, but very conservative family, very like, I was homeschooled. I understand that there's, you look weird at the kids who are like, yeah, I don't drink soda.
Yeah.
And you're like, what's wrong with you? Right? Like, you're a weirdo. So I have also that where I'm like, I don't want my kids to be the super weird ones where they're like, no, I only have organic, like fresh picked out of my backyard, fruits and vegetables and eggs from my chicken that I just picked this morning because I had to get up at 4 a.m. So it's super tough on a balancing act, but I also recognize, like what you said, these people that are influencing all of these choices that people make and advocating for Diet Coke being okay and it's okay to eat the candy and it's okay, it doesn't affect them. Like, cool, it doesn't affect me either, but I don't think I should promote it. Like, I don't think you're going to go like,
No, right. But this is where the everything in moderation was supposed to be, say, and this goes back to that narrative. That narrative was supposed to be, if you wanted a donut, it was, and you were out with your kid and it was the first time that whole entire month that they had a treat, perfectly okay. The problem is we are eating moderation means goldfish today, Cheez-Its tomorrow, donut on Wednesday, it in turn went to every day in moderation, not once in a blue moon. My mom was a hippie. My mom was very, organic, natural. And I used to make fun of her growing up. And now I apologize every day for making fun of her when she used to have like the original water filtration system that came out. And I used to be like, why do we have to have filtered water? Da, 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 da. But my dessert was yogurt and fruit, whipped cream and fruit. That was dessert. Going out for ice cream was like a once in a lifetime, like, oh my God, we get to go out for ice cream. This is great. It's so different now. Everything is so readily available. So these kids can have it every single day if they want it.
Yeah. And I totally agree. It's just the dose makes the poison drives me absolutely insane because I'm like, at some point you have to not be okay with any of it. Like, why have we as a collective country said, you know what? It's okay that there's Roundup on my food because it's not in a high enough quantity. Well, why are we okay with it, period?
Yeah.
Like, I understand agriculture, like, don't get into that with me, people, like, but at some point we have to go.
The EPA said it's fine.
Right. Like, at some point we have to go, I don't think we should have any of this, right? Like, remember, 4 out of 5 doctors used to recommend camels, right? Like, come on. Like, we're not too far removed from the time where doctors actively promoted smoking. And now, like, I feel like we're in the same situation with glyphosate where it's, 4 out of 5 doctors recommend Roundup as your source of glyphosate. And then 50 years from now, people are going to be like, what on earth were they doing?
Oh, I can't wait for that. To be honest, I can't wait because eventually it's going to hit ahead. It really will. I think we're hitting ahead with kids being so sick now. I think we're hitting ahead with, the adult population, obesity, cardiovascular disease, cancer, like everything. I mean, it's just every time I turn around, someone else is diagnosed with cancer, diabetes, heart issues, liver issues. It's just like a norm. It's like, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They put you on another medication. Yep. That makes sense. Okay. No problem. I get it. Yep.
Yeah. It's just totally normal. It's normal to be obese. It's normal to have diabetes. It's normal to have heart disease. It's normal to be on a statin. It's not like, I'm like, at some point, like how I understand modern medicine. Modern medicine is great, but I think one of the best ones, and this is another one that makes people mad, is the Dana White quote, where he's on a podcast and he goes, I will never go to a doctor ever again for my general health. Ever. He goes, if I have an acute problem, right? And other people have said this, modern medicine is fantastic if your arm's hanging by a limb.
Mhm.
Like, right, if your arm's falling off, modern medicine is fantastic. They'll save you, right? But if you're looking for chronic problems,
Yeah.
not the best.
Yeah. In acute settings, 100%. Our medicine has been amazing when there's an emergency, but when it comes to like trying to just fix your health and make you better, it's a broken system. It really is.
I agree. And I'm pretty sure we could do another hour on that topic alone. So I might have to have you back for this. But I want tell people where they can find you because I think kids is the biggest one. Like so many people are like, what do I do for my kids? I can eat a steak every day, but my kid's not going to. So what do I do? how do people find you? How do people get more information? Because I think you have great content when it comes to children.
Dang. Yeah. So my handle is Biomedical Healing for Kids. I have a Facebook group, Instagram, and that's my website is Biomedical Healing for Kids. I have a lot of free guides. You can definitely download all the guides. I have like one on constipation, working with your kid with autism and ADHD and figuring out what testing we should do and things like that, and really getting to the root cause of what's actually going on inside their body.
I will link all of your stuff down below. I really appreciate you being on. For anybody listening, we found another RD that we're good with. I'm going to start doing an art like JT's stamp of approval for RDs. I'm going to make a list. I'm going to start sending out badges like approved. I really appreciate you being on. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.